Hello, my name is Mark Taylor, and you're very welcome to the show, which is part of the Education on Fire podcast network. I just wanted to take this moment to thank our sponsor, the National Association for Primary Education, who speak for young children and all who live and work for them. This can include parents, teachers, governors, and all those interested in primary education. NAPE, which is a non-political charity, works tirelessly to support teachers in the classroom and leads the primary umbrella group of 30 primary subject associations and unions, and gives teachers and schools a voice at governmental level at consultation meetings with ministers for schools. If you'd like your voice to be heard and to find out more information, please visit their website at nape.org.uk. That's nape.org.uk. Hello and welcome to the Education on Fire podcast. The place where we share creative and inspiring learning in our schools. Hello, my name is Mark Taylor. Welcome back to this Wellbeing season. And today I'm talking to Helen Pengelly, and she's a qualified Maths and English as a foreign language teacher, but also has been studying meditation and personal development since 2005. And she has something called Conscious Schools company, which she founded back in 2015. And so really interested to see how we can help and support you as teachers in terms of that overall well-being, the understanding of overwhelm and stress and burnout. And we know that's a really big thing. So Helen, thanks so much for joining us today.
Very happy to be here, Mark. Thanks for inviting me on.
So let's start with your professional background. I know you've been involved in schools for about 20 years or so you really understand it from the coalface.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, well, I started out as you said, teaching English as a foreign language in the 1990s. We lived in Qatar when nobody had ever heard of it back then. And when we returned to the UK in 1999, and I went back to university because I dropped out of university after a year when I was 19, and went back to university to finish my degree and qualify as a secondary maths teacher. And I taught for 3 years and left. I was one of the, I think, is it 40% who leave within the first 5 years? I was one of those because I'd just gone through a divorce. I had 3 young children, and I was also quite ill. And at the end of my first year of teaching, I was diagnosed with celiac disease. So I had a lot going on. And added to that, I had quite a difficult time in my second teaching practice with my so-called mentor, and he really knocked my confidence. I'd had really good first teaching practice, and in my second teaching practice, I was going through my divorce as well. And on the very last day, my university tutor came in and said, what's happening? What's going on? And turned out my tutor was going to fail me. Not my tutor, my mentor. But he hadn't said anything to the university. And of course, when I spoke to her about what was going on in my personal life, and of course, she'd seen me teaching in my first teaching practice, she said, well, we have to put in for mitigating circumstances, and this so-called mentor should have never been my mentor. And I said, well, I've been trying to tell you that, but my tutor had been off sick. And so I'd gone through this awful teaching practice, and I'd spent most of the time sitting in the loo crying because I didn't know who to turn to. Anyway, that, as I say, that really knocked my confidence going into my first job. And I just really didn't believe in myself. And I was afraid to ask for help because I thought if they think I'm not coping, they'll think I'm not up to the job. And that, combined with everything else that was going on, meant that I left after 3 years. And also because I wanted to start business, doing something completely different. And it was through doing that business, which was actually selling gluten-free food. So nothing to do with teaching at all. But in that time, that is when I came across meditation and coaching through people that I met doing business networking. And I started going along to a meditation group in 2006. And really that saved my life because I was having a lot of problems with my eldest son as well. And I had some coaching with a friend of mine who was a coach, and I decided after I closed my business that I wanted to go and train to be a coach. Not at that time intending to do anything with teachers, because I had at that time a vision of supporting people who were celiacs and who were struggling to adapt to a gluten-free diet because there was no emotional support there. I mean, I'd had no problems with it myself, but I saw it so much more than food. It was all the emotional stuff that went with changing your diet and the whole sort of lifestyle change almost. And I Googled health coaching, found a course, and went to do my coach training, which lasted for a year. And while I was doing that, I went back and did some supply teaching. And this time my experience of teaching was very different because of what I'd learned in the intervening, I think it was 5 years in between. And I was able to cope a lot better. It wasn't necessarily any easier, especially doing supply, but I had the tools to cope with it. And I could come home at the end of the day, I could switch off, I was able to leave it behind. I stopped taking things personally. And even if I'd had a bad day, it didn't mean that I would then carry that forward to the next day, so every day as a fresh start. And it was while I was doing this, and I was just thinking, why on earth wasn't I taught this when I did my teacher training? Because it would have made all the difference. And obviously doing supply teaching, seeing what was really going on in schools, because they're not trying to impress you. I felt a bit like a secret shopper. You're going in just sort of observing sort of from the sidelines, seeing what's happening, what's really happening, and seeing how many teachers were going off sick because I was in there covering for them, how many teachers were leaving because sometimes I was in there covering where they hadn't been able to recruit anybody. And also the fact that I was, as I say, I'd learned to meditate, I'd learned to be mindful, and trying to be mindful and not react to what's going on around you in a school with several hundred people who aren't acting mindfully is really difficult. And that's when I realised that I wanted to help teachers because they were almost sort of in survival mode, really. And a lot of books, even now, that are coming out are written with the idea of helping teachers to cope. Well, the thing is that that's getting it all wrong. It's not about coping with essentially what is a broken system. We know that now because when I started Happy Teachers, which is what I originally called my business, and I was surprised that the domain name was available because there was nobody had ever thought that teachers' happiness was important before. And nobody was really talking about that at the time, of the importance of taking care of teachers. And then, of course, as we know, over the next few years, suddenly this well-being, for want of a better word, craze, just suddenly took off, and everybody saying, oh, went into panic mode, we need to look after teachers. And again, it was all this reaction about, oh, we need to do something, but instead of just taking a step back and thinking, okay, let's look at this objectively, look at what's going on, what needs to happen, it suddenly becomes a tick box exercise, or we need to do something and we'll just do anything, whether it works or not. And in most cases it doesn't, because I've seen what schools are doing, and it's sort of almost, I've been watching it kind of evolve from, okay, we've got to do something, panic, we'll do anything. And in a lot of cases, I think you look at schools and you think they would be better off if they'd have done nothing rather than they just creating more work for themselves. Or we've got to write a wellbeing policy. We've got to have a wellbeing manager. Well, I spoke to somebody who was her school's wellbeing manager, who was taking medication for anxiety because she was having to support everybody else and wasn't getting any support herself. And because the problem is that everybody's trying to fix what's out there. Oh, we have to sort out the workload. We have to write a new marking policy. We have to, as I say, put somebody in charge of well-being. Let's have a well-being week. I spoke to somebody who was on one of my programs earlier this year, and he said in his school they'd recently had a well-being week where they focused on well-being. And I said, well then what? And he said, exactly. And I think that they are starting to realise now that all this isn't working and it needs to be embedded into the school culture. And also, more importantly than that, it needs to come from the top, because I know from my own experience that when, going into school, you're trying to act mindfully and nobody else is. It's really difficult when it's not part of the school culture. And you've got the senior leadership team often, I'm not saying they're all like this because they're not, but in a lot of cases, they're actually making teachers' jobs more difficult because of their own lack of self-awareness on the effects that their thoughts and their actions are having on the school culture. And I actually had a meeting on Friday with, one or two ex-head teachers, another coach and a head teacher about how we can support head teachers more, because I speak to a lot of teachers, obviously, and head teachers, but more teachers than head teachers. And the reason a lot of teachers are finding it difficult, they want to do this, but in their school culture, it's very hard for them if the school culture is not supportive of their needs.
Yeah, and I guess the hardest thing for people once you're in that system, of course, is the fact that the system is such that it's all about accountability and about progress and tick boxing, like you said, and all those kind of things. And so therefore, when you put something new into the school, even if it's supposed to help, that's kind of often the mentality and the understanding of how you need to do something different. And I think that like I said, that whole nother level of just isn't helpful whatsoever. And there are so many things there that I really like. And I guess the starting point is the fact that no matter who you are as a teacher, no matter how self-aware you are, the one thing we do know is that it's a very difficult profession to be in at the moment because of the amount of workload that there is. I think actually being in an environment with 30 children also in a class is actually very, very demanding from an emotional level, from an energy level, from all of those things. And so you need to know that actually you need to be fighting fit as a person in order to be able to survive in that particular scenario. As if you're an athlete, you wouldn't try and go and run your fastest 100 meters having not trained. And I think there are some professions where you actually need to be on top form in order to actually cope with the demand to the job that's there. And I guess that's probably very true as teachers. And the other thing that I'd like to just pick up on that you said, which I think is also important, is the fact the whole well-being culture being something which is to fix something once you've got a problem, rather than the embedding that goes in so that you can actually be fighting fit, whether you happen to be a teacher or a pupil, in terms of what it is that you're involved in.
Yes, exactly. And we're talking more about mental and emotional fitness here. I mean, a few years ago, I was doing a maternity cover in a very, very difficult school. So I realised after I'd been there a little while that I had to, have I wouldn't say daily meditation practice. That would be my ideal, but most days I do. But when I was working in this school, my meditation practice was daily. Actually, my work became my practice. I got in super early, so I missed all the traffic and got there before most people. I get in about 7:30, go into my classroom. The first thing I did before I even thought about what I was going to be doing that day was sit down and meditate, making sure that I was in the right place mentally and emotionally, even before the first person came into my classroom, because there was no way otherwise that I would have survived, I don't think. And then at the end of the day, it didn't mean then that the kids were all perfectly behaved and the year 10s never made me cry. But at the end of the day, I got home and I was okay in myself because I stopped taking it personally. It's almost because you see when you become more self-aware, of your own sort of processes and how you're responding and what your triggers are, you see it in other people as well. So when you see sort of, for example, how the kids are behaving, and that's a whole other issue about how we deal with behaviour, they're not necessarily being naughty, they're just reacting to their conditions, whether that's how they're treated at home, by the teachers, just being in that situation in a school. I mean, whoever thought it was a good idea to stick several hundred kids in a building together and think that it would all be okay? And yet we have that expectation, don't we, that we're going to put all these kids with all these various needs, backgrounds, levels, different abilities, some are creative, some are more academic, some are sporty, and somehow think that we're going to chuck all these kids in together and it's going to be okay. And that's why you say that we have to be mentally, emotionally fit to be able to deal with all that's going on around us, as well as what's going on outside of school as well, that everybody's bringing into the mix.
Absolutely, and I think it's a really important thing, the outside of school thing that you mentioned, especially at the beginning of our conversation, the fact that on lots of social media and certainly in Facebook groups and things like that, you do often see this sense of, oh, I'm overwhelmed or I'm stressed because I need to find this resource or that resource or I don't have the time. But actually there's very little talk and chatter about the fact that that's only one part of some of the stress, because like you say, you might have people at home that you're having to deal with. You might be going through a divorce. Then you might have an ill member of the family that you're looking after. There's so many other things, but that doesn't even get taken into the equation a lot of the time. And I think that's a really big factor, as you described as well.
No, exactly. And one thing that I first became aware of actually last year during the summer holidays, and again, I'm seeing the same thing playing out this year in sort of social media, in Facebook groups, on Twitter and things. Look how many teachers struggle in the summer holidays because they haven't got that structure and that routine. And that's the thing with all these sort of wellbeing policies and that I've seen and blog posts, nobody is taking any of that into account. They're saying, oh yes, we need to reduce workload, we need to sort out our marking policy, behaviour policies, we need to appreciate staff more. And I'm saying there's not that there's anything wrong with any of those, but we need to take a holistic approach. They're not focusing on the actual teachers themselves, they're just focusing on changing what's going on around them, and the other thing is, of course, the thing about school budgets being tight, but also they don't seem to realise that if the government turn around today and say, okay, you can have all the money you want, that our problems aren't all going to magically disappear just because we inject a load of money into the system. And the only way that anything is going to change is when the people change, because it starts from within, because our outer world, our outer reality is merely a reflection of what's going on inside. Because because there are teachers out there who cope fine, and we only ever hear about the ones who don't. And I always think that we do get quite a skewed view of the situation, because obviously bad news sells, and it doesn't also remind us that despite all this, there is so much good stuff happening in schools, and teachers are doing an amazing job despite all the pressures and the challenges that they're up against. And I don't think we focus on that enough either.
I think that's absolutely true, and that's essentially why this podcast was originally created, is my passion project to share the great stuff that was going on in that kind of dialogue of negativity. So let's talk a little bit specifically now about what you do within conscious schools in terms of how do you work? Do you go in and do things with whole schools? And I appreciate what you said before about it comes from the top and that ethos being sort of dripped down through the school. Or if you're an individual teacher who's really listening and thinking, oh yeah, you're sort of speaking my language, do you work with them individually? So how does Conscious Schools work, and exactly how can you help people?
Well, mostly at the moment it's online. It's really just been growing over the last few months, really, because I was obviously, as I said, faced with the challenge of schools having limited budgets. So I've been trying to be more creative and thinking, well, how can I support as many people as possible, taking into account that schools don't have huge budgets. So I've created an online program, which is a self-study program. And of course, you learn as you go, and realizing that some people, they will do it and they'll get a lot out of it, but most people won't do anything. You know, you can present it to them on a platter. Look, here's the solution. I can help you, but they won't do anything about it because change is scary. And it's human nature that despite everything that's going on, what it boils down to is that we all have to take responsibility for ourselves. And a lot of people don't want to do that because they're quite happy to blame all their problems on the government and their head teacher or Ofsted or whatever. But the thing is, we're all part of the problem. If we're in it, we're part of the problem. And until everybody starts to take responsibility for what's going on in their school, in their classroom, then things won't change. So I believe it starts with us. And so that's why I created this online program. And as I said, the reason I decided to take it online is because teachers are busy, then they can fit it in around what they're doing. And it'll be recorded as well, so they can, if they can't make the live session, they'll be able to listen to the recording, and then they'll have it to go over in their own time as well.
I think it's really important to remember that essentially it's the heart of you is the starting point, and depending on where you are in your sort of teaching journey, you know, you got the excitement of being an NQT as well as all the stresses and trials of sort of finding your feet, and then you get into your teaching profession. It may well be that as you're getting further in, your personal life develops or changes, and so that you have a slightly different shift, and it may well be then as you go even further into your career that you sort of have different perspectives and different experiences. And I think all of those things are obviously very valid and will be very true to you depending on where you are. But I think, like you said, understanding who you are and where you come from to begin with is absolutely key. I think you're absolutely right about the senior leadership team, in as much as if a school has an idea about how they're trying to create an ethos, how they're trying to support teachers overall, then their well-being, their understanding, the amount of workload. You know, there are plenty of schools out there who have different marking policies which take the massive stress of time away from that particular thing. Or if they have, like you say, if they have programs within school to help teachers understand their well-being, not that they're trying to fix anything, but they can actually understand who they are, how they fit in, and have this whole perspective. We talked a little bit earlier about the fact that teachers often struggle to know what to do within the school holidays. You know, should you be working? Should you not be working? Should you be going into the classroom to get ready for the next term? Should you not open your laptop because you don't want to see what's coming up? And actually, one of the things I liked about what you said was the fact that you actually can create time for yourself, depending on what it is that you're after. And if we're assuming that you're a teacher who's gone into the profession, like I said, because you're caring and you're kind and you're gifted and you want to support children, but you're starting to feel like it's actually quite hard work, or you're starting to struggle, actually that's your main focus then. And within the holidays, maybe it is a summer holiday that you think, actually maybe I do now have the time to take a course, to do something, to be understanding of me and how I fit in and how it all fits around my world, so that I can then show up in the next year or the next term or whatever it happens to be to do that. And I think that's the beauty of the new online resources which are available, like you said, because you can do it in your own time, you can do it in a way that supports you so that you can give your best. And I think it's absolutely true that that you showing up into the world differently absolutely affects everyone around you, and showing up authentically and talking about these things within your class is going to have a very positive effect on your pupils and your students, and all the conversations that go around with it. And I think, yes, it'd be great if you could take some of these ideas to the head and that filter through, and if that's at all possible, then it's a brilliant thing to happen. And if you happen to be in a school where that's the case, then brilliant too. And that's the same with all sorts of education policies. But at the same time, as you go further down and further down and further down, it's about you at the end of the day. And like you said, that personal responsibility to want to feel different, to show up different, to know that actually next year when you go into the school, you're still going to have a lot of the same constraints and the same ideas. And like you said, you know, hundreds of kids within an environment which feels quite a lot like a prison these days, with all the fencing around and all the testing and all those sort of confines. That's probably not going to be different next year, despite the things that people are doing to try and help that. But what you can do is how you fit into it and how you show up in it, and that's really what we're talking about. And not fixing where you are, but giving you all those strengths and all those understandings that can make a difference tomorrow, you know, because it does happen very quickly once you start to understand it. And then with that, the time and the understanding and the experience as you grow into this whole way of working, which can just change everything, as you described before. So just to round up now, just tell people how they can find out more, exactly sort of the home of Conscious Schools, as it were, and the sorts of things they can expect if they want to really help themselves on that sort of personal level.
Yes, well, I do have sort of different levels of where they, I mean, I have a Facebook group which is called Conscious Teachers, and I think if you probably go into Facebook and search, you'll find it. And yeah, they can find out more at happyteachers.co.uk.
If you want to find out links to all these things as well, they will always be on the show notes. So if you go to educationonfire.com/conscious schools. Helen, thanks so much for chatting to me. It's been really interesting hearing your experience and how that's got you into this coaching world and well-being way of being able to support teachers from that real practical experience and understanding. So I really appreciate your time, and hopefully you can affect as many teachers positively as possible.
Well, thank you, Mark, for inviting me on. I've really enjoyed it. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about this. I also do daily videos on YouTube as well. It's called Happy Teachers, my YouTube channel.
Fantastic. And we'll have links to all those, as we said, on the show notes so that people can check that out. Lovely. Thank you so much, Helen.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
Thanks for listening to the Education on Fire podcast. For more information of each episode and to get in touch, go to educationonfire.com. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. Do you need help and support in creating and embedding music in your school? If so, we have created Primary Music on Fire to help you with just this, a music membership site that's taking the fear out of teaching music by giving you the step-by-step skills and ongoing support you need to produce lifelong musical memories for you, your school and your pupils. Go to educationonfire.com/primary-music.